Welcome to IAYTD, and today we're covering the history and some interesting facts about the Marvel Comics character Wolverine. Let's start at the beginning. When we first met Wolverine, he appeared in an issue of The Incredible Hulk in 1974 as the Hulk's enemy, though he was repurposed and somewhat redesigned when a new team of X-Men was debuted in 1975. At this time, they didn't have much idea about his abilities, really only focusing on the claws and that he had some sort of Canadian history. Slowly, his history and backstory were fleshed out, revealing that he was a product of an experimental agency called the Weapon X program. Before this experiment, he had the mutant ability to heal himself, and he was born with claws of bone that could go in and out of his hands. This experiment coated his skeleton, including these claws, with a fictional metal called adamantium. Since this metal is made up, they made the executive call that adamantium is essentially indestructible, aside from a few rare situations. So now we have Wolverine, as a member of the X-Men. He's a loner, not really connecting with many of the members, usually gruff and short with people.
This kid's crying. Do something.
His no-nonsense attitude, his claws, and savage fighting style made him a fan favorite, who would eventually bond with several members of the team, serving as an unlikely role model for younger mutants. As a way to explore his mysterious backstory, they gave Wolverine amnesia, meaning his life before the Weapon X program was often unexplored. Most of this story was only recently told in the early 2000s, in a series called Origin. It turns out he was born James Howlett in the late 1880s. His healing factor means he also doesn't age the same way we would. He turns out to be the son of a groundskeeper named Thomas Logan, which is where he picks up the nickname Logan from. He kills Thomas Logan before he realizes that he's his father, which is when his bone claws first emerge. He flees and begins a life of being a nomad. He lives for a long time wandering, spending time in several military groups and with several significant romances. It was at this time that he was given his adamantium and he was sent on a mission to assassinate Charles Xavier, though Xavier wiped his memory. There were times where his amnesia was also explained as his healing factor, removing traumatic memories, so the reasons for his missing memories is somewhat inconsistent. Let's talk about his mutant healing factor. This is something wildly differing across the span of comics. In some books, he can heal minor wounds, especially early on. He might be in a coma for days while he recuperates. This is ramped up in the 90s, where he could withstand bullets and shotgun blasts, even one time almost reforming completely from an explosion. Wolverine did actually die in the comics as he was suffocated by being covered in adamantium, in a series fittingly called The Death of Wolverine. No one stays dead though, so Marvel has found ways to still have Wolverine in the comics. The first way they've done this is to pass on the title of Wolverine to someone else, to a clone of Wolverine called X-23, which is a young girl created by the Weapon X program after the success that they saw with Wolverine. She only has 2 claws instead of 3, but she has a claw that juts from her feet instead. After Logan died, she took on the mantle of Wolverine. Here's another way they've gotten around killing him. To explain this, I need to zoom out. There are stories that happen in Marvel Comics that occur in other realities, stories that aren't confined to our reality, so anything goes. One popular arc was called Old Man Logan, and featured an old Wolverine living in a wasteland that was formerly the United States, where supervillains have divvied up the country, and he has vowed to never use his claws. That is, until he finds it absolutely necessary. This story was incredibly popular, so Marvel found a way to bring that Wolverine into our mainstream continuity alongside other heroes of today. So while our Logan is dead, Old Man Logan and X-23 both carry on his legacy, at least for now. Interestingly, the film Logan takes the core concepts of Old Man Logan and meshes with the introduction of X-23 to create an original story. Let's talk about more places in media that we've seen Wolverine. Starting with animation, Wolverine has been a key figure in every iteration of X-Men cartoons, including but not limited to X-Men the Animated Series, X-Men Evolution, and the short-lived Wolverine and the X-Men. In live action, we've only seen one Wolverine, played by Hugh Jackman, who has now been playing the character for almost 2 decades. Since Wolverine has been appearing in comics since the early 1970s, we've seen a lot of substantial story arcs for him, so going through them all would be exhaustive. But here's some fun highlights and bits of trivia. For example, Wolverine has a son from the time he spent in Japan. His son Daken inherited his father's healing factor and bone claws, as well as the ability to control the emotions of those around him using pheromones. In terms of villains, Wolverine's most notable villain is the brute Sabretooth, who served alongside him as part of the Weapon X program. They have healing factors and decreased aging, meaning their rivalry has lasted an incredibly long time. Sabretooth doesn't have the claws like Wolverine, but there were stints in the comics where his skeleton was also laced with adamantium. But this is frustratingly complicated, as writers seemingly went back and forth if they wanted him to have adamantium or not. In the X-Men films, we're led to believe that Sabretooth and Wolverine are brothers, but in the comics that isn't the case. In addition to serving on the X-Men, Wolverine also spent long stints as an Avenger, usually when the Avengers comics weren't selling hot and they knew the Wolverine would add some interest. This just adds to the frustration that Marvel Studios doesn't have access to the pantheon of X-Men characters, meaning we'll never see them on screen together unless these studios can work out some sort of miraculous deal. I have an entire other video explaining the Marvel movie rights if you'd like more info on that. So this is just a peek into the character known as Wolverine, or Logan, or James, whatever you want to call him. If you're a fan of Wolverine, let me know in the comments what you enjoy. What's your favorite iteration of Wolverine? What's your favorite arc or collection? If someone wanted to get into Wolverine, what would be a good starting place? Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe for other stuff just like this.